Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie Caldwell, and I'm a member of the Inspira Advantage team. Thank you so much for joining our webinar on gaining clinical experience to become a competitive med school applicant. We have two fantastic panelists with us today who are admissions consultants with Inspira Advantage, and they're here to share their wealth of information with you. Inspira Advantage is a admissions consulting company that helps students through their med school candidacy building application process, interviews, really every part of applying to med school. We are available to help you with. So with that, we'll dive right in. So today we'll introduce our panelists. We'll talk about what counts as clinical experience, the different types of clinical experience you can have, why it's important in your med school applications, how to choose experiences that might be best for you, and then making the most of your clinical experience, some tips and tricks. Then we'll open things up for a Q&A. So we have Nate and Andrew here with us today. Nate, can you give us an introduction?
Hi, everyone. I'm Nate. I am a first-year PhD student at USC Keck School of Medicine. I'm getting my PhD in neuroscience. I've done the first 2 years of medical school, the book years, and I have 2 more afterwards that will be the clinical years. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Andrew, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm Andrew. I'm, as Hallie said, one of the Inspira admissions counselors. Currently, I'm a first-year anesthesia resident at the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai. I did medical school there, and I've helped a bunch of people get into different medical schools all over the country. So this is a great talk to hear or listen to really see how well-rounded your application is and how competitive you are.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. We very much appreciate it. So with that, we'll dive right in. What counts as clinical experience?
Awesome. So clinical experience is a broad term that can be used to describe any meaningful patient-facing experience. More specifically, clinical experience can be any supervised placement within a clinical setting, hospitals, clinics, care centers, where one directly engages with patients and can observe direct clinical patient care. Clinical experience can also be a little bit more broad to include non-typical settings like international settings where you're delivering clinical care or participating as part of a care team.
Fantastic. Andrew, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that this is probably the best definition that you'll find in terms of making sure that everything that you've done, or if you're saying like, oh, does volunteering at an old folks home count as clinical experience? Absolutely. Obviously, volunteering at a hospital or any community center, like Planned Parenthood, definitely counts as clinical experience. It's really that face-to-face contact in any sort of healthcare setting. Where you are interacting with people. And then, we'll dive into a bit later how the different opportunities there are to get this clinical experience.
All right, fantastic. Let's dive into this a little bit deeper.
Exactly. So meaningful and impactful clinical experiences usually will provide you with, the experience to actually go and interact with people learning. It's so funny that people always struggle with learning how to communicate. I'm still learning every single day when I'm talking to patients, talking to providers, talking to fellow residents and interns. Learning how to communicate, developing skills like compassion and empathy, and bedside manner as well. Those skills will serve you so well from day 0 of medical school or day 1 of undergrad all the way through until you're an attending, and even till the last day you're practicing as a physician. And it can't be understated or overstated how important these skills are, because that's what patients see and that's what they feel during this interaction. And you'll be able to provide experiences to help direct goals within the medical field, and then hopefully you'll also learn how to navigate different clinical settings, whether that's a hospital or a clinic, as we mentioned earlier, and work with different teams. That includes doctors, nurses, any other ancillary healthcare people, other volunteers, and of course the patients themselves.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, I really truly agree with so much of what Andrew just said. And I think that communication is a hugely undervalued skill in medicine. And you learn so much of that from those early clinical experiences, being able to learn how to just communicate with patients and their families, and communicating across language barriers at certain points in time. And it ends up being really important for patients understanding their treatment plans and feeling like really engaged in the care process. I think like one of the really other important things about clinical experience that makes it meaningful and impactful is if it's a meaningful academic experience. So beyond just learning the communication skills you also get in these settings, but you can also start to take away little bits of valuable clinical knowledge that can then sort of prepare you for that next step in your career when you do make it to med school.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nate. That's absolutely correct.
All right, let's talk about some different types of clinical experience.
Awesome. So there are two main types of clinical experience. There's paid and unpaid clinical experience. Paid clinical experience can come in the form of full-time jobs or part-time jobs throughout your undergrad or during gap years. You can have access to paid clinical experiences in hospitals or private clinics. Typically, paid experiences are more likely to get you administrative tasks within clinical settings, as well as other paid positions require certain qualifications or certifications or more experience. Undergraduate students may not immediately have these certifications available, or they might actually choose to undergo the trainings or coursework like EMT coursework to begin to engage in these paid clinical experiences. Volunteer or unpaid clinical experiences can give you a large array of opportunities to choose from. One of the biggest perks of unpaid clinical experience, I think, is the flexibility in scheduling and being able to allow it to like really accommodate your schedule and any other responsibilities that you have. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about that. Andrew, anything?
No, I think yeah, I think the next slides will probably elucidate a little more clearly what we mean by a paid clinical experience, or at least examples of paid clinical experiences, to help sort of really understand where you can find them. And then the volunteer and unpaid clinical experiences, again, it's sort of this as long as you're in a hospital helping people or a clinical setting, then usually that counts. But again, there are a bunch of different ways that you can also get them.
And I think one thing that'll really become clear is like each of these have their values and different points in your career or like your career trajectory. At certain points, these unpaid clinical experiences may be more valuable, and at certain points, these paid clinical experiences may be more valuable to your academic development.
Do you find that med schools have a particular preference for paid versus unpaid experience when going through applications?
That's an excellent question. And I think that above whether it's paid or unpaid, it's a lot about initiative, leadership, and what you've done with the clinical experience. So, for example, if you have delivered coffee on, you know, different wards of the hospital for, all 4 years of undergrad, but that's all you've done for 4 years, and you have, let's say, 500 hours from that, that's great. But it's not really a meaningful clinical experience, as Nate said. You really want to push yourself. So the first, few months that you're getting used to a system, understand like the pros and cons or strengths and weaknesses of a system. Say, hey, like I go around and I deliver coffee to patients, on the cancer floor, for example. Sorry, some New York white noise. And then we have people who go around and, after months of delivering coffee, they say, these people, these cancer patients, they really need something else besides coffee. I know we can give coffee because that's what the budget's for, but you go around, you go to your supervisor and say, hey, like, I think we should really start to push for a more creative volunteering initiative. So I want to have music in medicine, for example. And you get a couple of your friends who were in a band or played some instruments, even if it's a tambourine. I can play the tambourine. It's not that hard. And you can go around and really make these people's days better, and you can really start to show leadership and initiative through these hospitals. And that actually changes a lot of the aspect of both your application and how the medical schools will view the application itself, because it shows that you're a leader. It shows that you're not just doing it for the hours, and that you actually care about these people who are learning, as Nate said, these very tangible skills that all translate really, really well into medical school and residency. So that's really important to show.
Yeah, I totally agree with Andrew 100%. I think leadership is a really important skill that you can demonstrate through these opportunities. I think with a lot of unpaid clinical experience or volunteer experience, it's really important early on in the application. And I think at a certain point, you have to identify for yourself a point of diminishing returns. So for me, I started off in a volunteer hospital setting. And I really had the goal initially of completing 280 hours in the program. But at a certain point, I wasn't really gaining anything else from this hospital volunteer experience besides like helping to make patient beds or helping to bring up hospital trays. And it was really important early on to teach me how to interact with patients, learn how to communicate across language barriers, learn how to communicate as part of a team. But at a certain point, there was like the diminishing return of like, I am not getting as much out of this for my own professional development. And I think that's the important part, where maybe you start to switch or pivot to another type of clinical experience where you get maybe a little bit more experience out of it. For me, that was medical scribing. I will say, Hallie, to answer your question, I think they're both valued in the medical admissions, like in viewing medical admissions. I think both are valued. I think people really look at like, what were your duties and responsibilities? What skills did you gain from this? Because these are skills that you're probably going to talk about in your interviews or in your application. And if you spent, like Andrew said, 500 hours just delivering coffee, that maybe wasn't the most valuable use of your time in like building those skills. So I think at a certain point, like people tend to like, I think there's maybe a little bit more favor looked upon paid clinical experience at certain points of time because they normally have a larger range of responsibilities and roles that contribute to the patient care team, and I think are at a certain point more directly transferable to your skills as a medical student or your skills as a future physician. I think volunteer and unpaid experience is really important early on to develop those skills, but later on throughout your trajectory, you've got to analyze for yourself how important is it and how much are you developing with it.
Great. Thank you both so much for answering that. I know that's a pretty common question that we get.
Sure, I could take this slide, which is, well, both types of clinical experiences, the paid and unpaid, can be very beneficial in terms of expanding your network and connecting with healthcare professionals, other volunteers or coordinators. It also gives students the opportunity to create their own, initiatives or take on more roles where they need it. Sort of what we talked about earlier. That said, it is beneficial to aim for a balance of paid and unpaid clinical experiences. I think this goes to what Nate was saying, right? Like if you are in a system where you feel stuck and you say you've come up with a couple of ideas, but they're really like not letting you move forward for whatever reason, there's no point in like staying there. There's no school that's going to be like, well, you like we're here for 6 months and then stopped. Like, what's up with that? If you went on and did something else, right? You can just say, hey, like, wasn't for me. Like, I wanted to do this and they didn't let me, but I was able to do it in this area. I know there are a couple of students that I've worked with through Inspira who have amazing clinical experiences where they started as a volunteer, for example, in Planned Parenthood. And they actually started as a volunteer there where they were just restocking shelves. And then they came and saw, hey, like we're always running out of, like, whatever, feminine hygiene products there are. And we need to actually just make new shelf space for that. And they came up with these ideas and then they pushed it. And eventually they were actually hired as an administrative assistant. And then they moved up the ladder in Planned Parenthood. And eventually they were actually coordinating other volunteers and helping run different Planned Parenthoods supply chains through Texas. So I think there's a lot of ways that you can make a paid or unpaid volunteer position into a really big opportunity that can make it paid, and both make it worth your time monetarily and also make it, expand your network, get those really, really strong letters of rec, and of course get that, academic pursuit and skills that you actually need through medical school.
Yeah, and I think a really important thing that Andrew touched on a little bit there is I think in considering the different types of clinical experiences, whether it's paid or unpaid, like following your passions is a really important aspect of the type of experiences you engage in. If you're someone that's really, really passionate about reproductive health care equality in this country, the Planned Parenthood setting is an incredible place for you to build those clinical skills, get to know clinicians who are actively doing that type of work, see if it's a good fit for you. And it really, it helps to craft like this story in your medical school application that shows who you are, what your values are, and how those values that you have directed the types of experience you engaged in, and then how that has changed the kind of future physician you're going to be.
Those are some great points. And I appreciate you adding in that piece about passion. I think it's something we talk about in a lot of our webinars and is something that is a very common thread through all parts of the application process. So here's some specific examples of paid versus unpaid experiences.
Yeah, and I can touch on a little bit about my different experiences. I've held a variety of these positions, actually. So for paid clinical experiences, there are opportunities in medical scribing as a certified nursing assistant or CNA or skilled nursing assistant, a phlebotomist as an EMT. There are some also volunteer EMT positions often offered at the undergraduate level, and there are clubs that do that kind of work. Opportunities as an ER tech or clinical research positions as clinical research study coordinators, clinical research study assistants. Some of the volunteer unpaid clinical experience include physician shadowing, hospice volunteer, volunteer EMT, emergency room volunteer, medical center volunteer. I can touch on some of the experiences I've actually done. I started off my first year after undergrad as a medical scribe in an emergency department. And I continued that throughout summers, winter breaks. I was working on Thanksgiving and Christmas some years. And it was a really good opportunity because I was able to do it when I was like not busy with school, but it was a great opportunity to really ground and connect me to the clinical setting. I felt as a medical scribe, it really like affirmed my passion for medicine. Medical scribing is where you work really closely with the physician, seeing with them all the patients and cases and procedures they do in a day, and documenting for them. One of the other benefits I think of medical scribing is you really closely learn how to write a note. Before you are even a medical student, you know how to write a physician note. I came into medical school and we get started with our clinical experiences early. And my preceptor saw my medical note and was like, wow, you're stellar at writing these already. How did you get this experience? And I'm like, I've been doing this for years. And I had developed a ton of knowledge of medical terminology, ton of experience with seeing like different types of cases. And it's a really incredible opportunity for me. I was working in an emergency department setting. I got to see a lot of trauma cases. I think one of the most valuable aspects of it that goes just beyond physician shadowing is that you are a valuable member of the team and you are actively learning as you are doing it. You are learning some of the skills that will help you as a physician, especially some of those documenting skills, which are usually physicians' least favorite part. And I think that beyond the benefit of also getting a paycheck, you really like feel valued by the people you're working with because you make their job that much easier. Another position I held was as a clinical research coordinator. A lot of large academic medical centers we'll have clinical research studies ongoing that are headed by principal investigators who are often MDs or MD-PhDs who are looking at investigational drugs or devices. And that gives you a really incredible opportunity to directly interface with patients while also being involved with research. And you can sometimes take some of those research positions above and beyond to actually bridge into research experiences, papers, publications, presentations. Yeah, that's all I've got. Andrew, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. I think you did way more than I did. Um, I think just to really echo that, well, my own 2 cents is I think everyone should have an emergency room experience before going into medical school because it's the most sort of raw environment where no matter what level of education you are or where you are in your training, they always need a pair of hands somewhere in the emergency department doing something. That could be as, you know, docile as, writing something down or keeping track of a medication to you will be doing chest compressions at some point in a trauma day, right? Like I've had that experience as a, pre-med, as a med student, as a resident. Like, it'll never end. And getting those BLS or ACLS certifications are also very useful during this time. Especially if you are going to be an EMT, ER tech, you're going to need those skills anyway. Of course, as you come to medical school, I think medical scribing is great. I could definitely tell who has done medical scribing, as you said, Nate, based on how thorough and well organized people's notes are, because mine are not usually that organized. I keep it pretty plain text, which is not always great. And then I think that in terms of physician shadowing for unpaid, that's usually a separate category for medical schools when they're looking at all of your hours, right? So you can't bank on, you're really close to, let's say, an orthopedic surgeon that, somehow and that you've worked with. But if you have 300 total hours of clinical experience and 250 of them are shadowing hours with this guy or his group, that's not really going to look as good as being the medical scribe, in an emergency room, doing all this, gaining all this knowledge. And of course, this gives you a lot of content to write about, as Nate said, in your in your primary application, both in your personal statement, in your experiences, in your secondaries when you're answering questions, because I'd say 80 to 90% of all secondaries are based around a clinical experience or what you aim to gain out of medicine. And then, of course, during the interviews, when you need to talk about something that was impactful, something that you did that was impactful, something a patient has told you that, changed your perspective on something, that you're not going to get any of that if you're, pushing coffee or doing something very clandestine in the hospital. You really need to get in there. You need to see real things. I actually did do the second bullet point there, which was hospice shadowing through the VA. So that was really meaningful. That was a really obviously there's a lot of times where it was hard, but if you're an unpaid volunteer, you don't want to go in, you need to take a week off, that's okay, right? You can do that. You can request that, and you're not gonna lose any money because you weren't making any money. And they're like, yeah, they're very understanding. All the good volunteer coordinators, they get it. You take your time, especially for like something like hospice, right? You can be on for a few days. I was on what's called the Twilight Shift, which was all these VAs in this program called the No Vet Dies Alone program, where anyone who is diagnosed with less than 72 hours to live, there's always someone by their side at bedside through that process. So I usually staff the hours from like there's somewhere like 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. So really just wacky hours. But and you just be there and you read to them or play music just in their room. And you really like connect with people. And I think that's something you should, not necessarily that experience, but definitely getting in there. And I wrote about that a lot. I was asked about that a lot during the trip too. And I still think about that to this day.
Yeah, and to touch on a couple of the things that Andrew said, I think him bringing up the emergency room, it is a great place to get experience because it's a wide variety of medicine that you are seeing. You get exposed to a lot. There's a lot of breadth there. Um, and the perks of that is usually you don't have to have any insane amount of specific knowledge because emergency medicine, they're a little bit of generalists to an extent, and they see a lot and they know about a lot of different things, but you don't have to have very advanced specialty knowledge. And then again, with the physician shadowing, I think physician shadowing does sort of fall into a different category. Like Andrew said, I think with a lot of these other experiences or opportunities, there's an aspect that's mutually beneficial. You are gaining some experience or skills out of it, but there's also patients, hospital systems that are gaining something that you're putting forward into the system to help it work. When it comes to physician shadowing, it's a little bit more about what you're gaining, because you're not exactly directly participating. You're just gaining the experience of seeing things, which I think is a really incredible opportunity to be exposed to a wide variety of things and help you get an idea of if you like medicine and if you're interested. But again, I think with physician shadowing, the point of diminishing returns happens rather early. And I think that a lot of these other positions where you are contributing something to the system tend to be valued a little bit more, looked a little more favorably upon in the application process. You don't want to have like hundreds and hundreds of physician shadowing hours that could be put and used for in a better way.
You both brought up some great points, and also thank you for sharing your experiences. I'm sure a lot of our participants can learn from that. So I've got some pros and cons of paid clinical experiences.
Sure. So we kind of talked about that in different ancillary fashions through this webinar, but some obvious pros are you get to make money during it, and that's really nice to have some free cash in your college time because you have some fun, go on a quick trip. I can't I can't emphasize enough that you should also like have fun. Like, please don't ruin your life for this. Please go and go to that party, go take that trip. Please go and do those things. Take the weekend off, do whatever it takes so you don't. If you're burned out before medical school, that's terrible. Like, oh my God. And you should have some of that. And of course, whatever your financial situation is, be whatever it takes to do that as well. In aiming for paid clinical experiences can lead to certifications, which is very true. I think one of the things that I just thought of, if you are raised in, let's say, a bilingual or non-English speaking household, and you can get your certification to be a medical translator, that is an amazing skill to have, and actually something that can be pretty flexible for you. Like, you could probably take calls from home. You have to go to like a call center or anything, as long as you have like a reasonable phone. You can be like a Spanish interpreter. Those are immensely useful. And then of course, if you have like the certification for that, you'll be everyone's favorite person in the hospital, like 100%. That you can sign any translation, sign all the consent forms and everything like that. And you provide a more formal medical role within the medical field. This is, exactly what Nate was saying. Like, you will not just be stuck with the mundane task because they're paying you, so they will give you a lot more responsibility. That being said, the responsibility might be admin work. That first negative bullet point is true to some degree. Of course, if you go and become an EMT, a scribe, or one of those like translators, you'll get far more clinical experience as well. Less flexibility with hours, that's very true, because you'll probably have some sort of weekly schedule, or they'll book you for this many hours a month, and you just like have to make that work. So that can be a little challenging. You have a lot of tests or labs and stuff like that or a lot of schoolwork that you're trying to work through as well. As long as you're transparent about your schedule, I think most people are pretty understanding, because all they want to make sure is that you have coverage. That's the biggest thing, is if you have coverage for you being out, you'll be totally fine. May require certifications or formal training. That's true. Usually the certifications you'll probably get one way or another. And, as we said earlier, any amount of ACLS, BLS, repeat training, or PALS training is always good. And if you repeat the training in medical school, that's even better because it's just learning more of the algorithms. Things actually change every about 5 years, like BLS, not the rhythm, but whether to give rescue breaths, how to do infant chest compressions versus adult chest compressions. So there's a lot of that, and I think that the paid clinical experiences overall are very positive.
I think a lot of those
Yeah.
cons actually can also be like not twisted into, but it can also count as pros as well. Just what you're ready for at the time.
Yeah, and I will say that touching back on those hours and natures of work, I absolutely loved scribing in an emergency room. And there are other settings where you can scribe in other types of clinics or hospital departments where you can scribe. But in an emergency room, I had 5 a.m. shifts. I had 8 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. shifts. I had shifts where I worked holidays. Um, and that was just an aspect of the job and something that I had to do. Yeah, so I think, but there is the nice component of making money through these paid clinical experiences, and they tend to challenge you. They challenge you to develop academically and skill wise. Sometimes they can have a little bit of stress attached to it. That is common to any position in the medical field.
All right, let's move on to pros and cons of unpaid clinical experiences. And I'm sure here too, there's definitely things that are the cons part of those are pros as well.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest pros is showing commitment to giving back to the community. This is something that's really heavily looked upon in the medical school applications process. They want to see that you have a commitment to care for communities and provide, to be dedicated to improving the health of these communities and these patients that you're caring for, especially at certain medical schools. Coming from Keck, where we serve a large public hospital, with a big safety net for these surrounding communities, many of whom are Spanish speaking. And some, I think a good chunk, are living at or below the poverty line. There's a huge look in the admissions process on dedication to community service. And I think that is a huge aspect. And it depends on the different medical schools you're applying to, but that can be a very stressed component of something that they look for in your medical school application is commitment to community service and volunteerism. There is, like we talked about before, a larger flexibility in terms of schedule. It may be easier to take time off, accommodate around school or midterms. If you are busy that week, it'll probably be a little bit easier to get that week off, and it is a little less regular of a schedule, and maybe there isn't as consistent of a time commitment where you're not expected to have 2 shifts per week or be doing 16 hours per week. The ability to create your own opportunities beyond your title. I'm sure Andrew will elaborate more on this because he sort of went into it earlier. But I think you really have the unique opportunity when you're in these positions. You're really usually interacting with the patients one-on-one and sometimes alone, that you're able to sort of see these needs that might get looked over, and you can use your creativity to come up with solutions that can fix that, and improve sort of the morale. One of the cons is it is unpaid. I think that is a big differentiator. The tasks while volunteering may feel mundane. I think that is a big aspect of something I encountered with hospital volunteering. At first, it is really exciting just to be in the clinical setting. But sometimes after a certain point, it feels like a little repetitive. I think it's important to remember that you're really contributing in this instance and like making a difference. Even though you're doing those little activities, it makes the next person in the chain of command's job up easier. It allows them to take a little bit off their plate, and they might be able to take a little bit off the plate of the next person up in line. So it is really important, really helpful to helping our hospital systems. And it may offer limited practical experience. again, with volunteering, many of the experiences are less specialized. So your roles and responsibilities may be more similar to that of a nursing assistant or just a general hospital volunteer.
Yeah, and just to throw my 2 cents out there, I agree with everything that Nate said. I think it's so important to show commitment back to your community. So many more schools, especially if you're applying to a school that you are local to. So for example, if you live in New York and applying to a New York school, you should do something for the New York community or the California community, right? It looks not great if you haven't done anything for the community that you're trying to practice medicine in. So, you know, finding ways to get involved really early with those clinics, even things like, food shelters and um, really getting off to there's so many like student run clinics that would love volunteers. Like I could probably think of 3 off the top of my head just in New York that could use more volunteers. And of course, going back to the emergency room, you can always go to an emergency room, and if there's an eager person who shows up to an ER, they will be worked, and they will find jobs for you. Um, in terms of, you know, tasks may feel mundane. I'll plug the advantages of having someone from or the Inspira team really help you out here. Like you can always reach out, and they can hook you up with um, someone like Nate who can really guide you to be like, yeah, like this volunteer experience is really good, and help you see that 4,000 foot or the 40,000 foot view of like describing feels really really boring, but I'm actually learning so much because I know what these medical abbreviations are. I know what this is, and we can always give you a little bit of our insight to like, yeah, like you've been delivering coffee for 6 months. That's probably not doing you any favors at this point. You've hit the max of there's no more return, and you're dumping a ton of hours into it. Let's focus on something that's a little more academic. Let's focus on something that's a little bit more of this and that. And there's always the opportunity to bounce ideas um, off of each other to see where you can really build the application. And I think Nate, you mentioned this really early, is to really have a strong theme to your application, because I think there's nothing more confusing, having looked at some applications into medical school for the last 3 years, than someone who's done 6 different volunteering experiences for, let's say, 20 to 50 hours each, and they are not related to each other.
Mhm.
And you're like, okay, so you were like a camp counselor, then you went and you were like pushing your ED tech volunteer, then you were this and you basically hit everything, and they think it's good because like, oh, like they're jack of all trades but master of none. And I think it really comes across more of the latter than the former, because most of the volunteering experiences, as we've said, are like pretty lowish level, but you can always make the opportunity for yourself to build that leadership, to build that, community involvement, and then build your story through that as to why this is really meaningful. And of course, they're going to reflect through this time as like, either affirm or change how you view medicine, and then really confirm why you want to go into this field. It's a tough field. There's no two ways about it. So making sure that you really get involved, making sure that your application is meaningful, has a really nice theme to it, will give you a lot of value beyond, things that you can just quantify on your application.
Great. Thank you all so much. It's a lot of fantastic information and a lot of different things to consider. Let's talk a little bit about the value of clinical experience. We'll probably move a little bit quicker through these slides, just so we can make sure that we are able to touch on some Q&A questions at the end. So let's talk the value of clinical experience through your med school journey.
Sure. So value clinical experience, it obviously allows you to, as we said earlier, understand why you want to do medicine in the first place. It's hopefully to help people and really get involved both in your community research, everything like that. Identify areas that you're interested in, right? This gives you, you have the opportunity of time, because eventually it'll hit you sooner than you know. You have to decide what you want to do in medicine. It's a pretty broad field. So if you're interested in oncology and cancer, right? Spend time on the cancer floor. Really understand what that means to be a hematologist oncologist. Or if you're interested in surgery, really understand what it means to be a surgeon, or an ED doc. Understand what it means to work in the emergency room. Direct your learning, gain hands-on patient-facing experiences, and navigating the clinical setting all go hand in hand, right? You need to know how to do that. You need to be able to negotiate, excuse me, obviously, and communicate, to your patients, to your attendings, or to the other physicians and other volunteers. And you're going to develop these essential skills. And communication, as we said earlier, is one of the most essential skills that you need to develop. And showing these volunteering hours actually is one of the quantifiable ways of showing that you have some, modicum level of communication to a med school application.
And I think beyond just developing skills, it can allow you to develop some foundational medical knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. How to choose some clinical experiences to differentiate your profile.
All right. So, as previously mentioned, considering what your clinical experience will give you from the eyes of the medical school admissions officers, I think you can also consider this from your own personal eyes. What are you gaining from the experience? This is essential to building a competitive applicant profile. Focus on gaining clinical experience that will give you a thorough understanding of what is expected in the medical profession, what the profession is like what is the day-to-day, what are the experiences, what are the challenges and pitfalls of the career, and what aspects do you really like about it that are driving you to pursue this path. Give you room to grow when it comes to patient interaction and bedside manner. I think it's really important to develop these foundational skills in patient communication really early on. Gives you insight into your medical career. Like we said, maybe some insight in being able to pick a specialty. And sometimes what's also valuable is knowing what you don't like. I think that's something that we forget, is that if you know you don't like working in a certain type of department, like I worked in endocrinology and maybe I decide I'm not interested in endocrinology, that's a valuable thing to know. There's one specialty that's off your list now. Even if you didn't find the one, that's one less that you're looking at. Gives you experience in navigating clinical and hospital settings and opportunities to work with others in these settings. I think it's really important to learn how to participate as part of a team in medicine. Medicine is really a team sport, and you are navigating across all kinds of different roles and jobs in the hospital, and being able to communicate with people along the entire food chain in a non-hierarchical way is really important and leads to better patient care outcomes. So sort of in these moments when you're now at the bottom of the food chain, it's really important to remember that when you are at the top of the food chain, and take that hierarchy away and be able to communicate with everyone as part of a team. One last note, I think, just again, focus on gaining these experiences that build upon your skill set and clinical knowledge. Identify that point when you're maybe no longer growing in the position.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that's written on the slide, and you did a great job elaborating on those points. And something you said earlier is that just please be passionate about what you do. There's nothing worse than, having someone or asking someone during an interview trial, hey, can you tell me more about this awesome, experience that you had working at this geriatric center? It was okay. That is the worst possible answer that you can possibly give, right? You need to show that you gave something and that you also got something back in terms of an experience, a skill, something, right? But if you really don't think you're gaining anything, it's not worth it. Just try to shift your focus, shift your time, shift your energy.
And we can usually immediately tell in an application, if there's some activity that was just a checkbox activity and the person absolutely despised doing it, it really like immediately comes across in the writing and then the way you talk about it during the interview. Even if you don't think it's coming across, it comes across.
Hot tip for everyone listening. They know. And let's talk about some personal considerations.
Yeah, and
Talked about a lot of these as well as
I think we talked about a lot of these exactly, Hallie. So I'll just sort of fly through these. It's basically, you know what your year or semester should look like. You know when your tests are. You know what your time commitments are for various classes, right? Your GPA is so essential to the application to a point. But don't ever like sacrifice your GPA for 5 extra volunteering hours. That will not matter, right? Do really well on your tests. Don't take away from your MCAT studying. Don't take away from your class studying. And I'd say 99% of these opportunities will exist the next year, right? The emergency room's not going anywhere. If you need to wait a year or wait a semester, that's totally fine, right? Um, and then, yeah, depending on where you are, traditional versus non-traditional applicant, you also see like, can you take an extra year for clinical experience? And if you do take a whole year for clinical experience, you're supposed to get more, obviously, because you have more time and that's where your energy is going. And then short versus long-term clinical experiences, you can always do both, right? You can always have a long-term clinical job that's paying the bills, right? Making sure you're not, you know, uh, destitute and homeless, right? You need to keep the lights on. But you also go through and volunteer and you make sure that you're gaining more and more and more skills every single day. So all these are great balances to your application, and also, as Nate said, to focus you both on your passion and why you're applying into medical school, and to really think about what you like and what you don't like.
Yeah, and I think that short-term clinical experience, one thing about it is like it's good to have short-term clinical experience if you have it that's objective focused. Like if you are going and working in an international healthcare setting, that's an awesome short-term clinical experience that is focused on an objective. Or if you're shadowing to see if you like a profession, awesome short-term clinical experience. If you have a lot of sporadic volunteer hours because nothing's stuck at any hospital, you want it and you got bored of it and quit, that's where there's like a missing piece or component there.
great considerations. I think we have just one more here.
Yeah, so just some more personal considerations. How many hours do you need? There is no golden answer to that question. It really varies based on the applicant and it varies based on your passions. There are successful applicants from a wide variety of backgrounds. I will say like having a little more is helpful. Obviously, if you're the non-traditional student, like it can be helpful to have even more because you had more time to work on those. But if you're a career path pivot, like you need some to show that you have an interest in the career. But if you were working in tech industry for 7 years, like they're going to understand. Think about the skills that you're hoping to work on and what you want to learn. Again, that's what you gain from the experience as much as they gain something from you. And what experiences do you think will make you more equipped for medical school? And not just medical school, but your career as a future physician. This is a trajectory that you're on. I think that's one of the most important things to touch on is you are gaining these experiences that are going to make you a better future doctor. And especially right now when you're sort of at the lower level of things, you're more on like the patient level perspective of things and being able to see through their eyes more directly than some people who are further along in their careers. And you can take many of those things with you further. And where maybe some like holes in your application that you want to fill with experiences that are going to further develop your application, further build out your profile. We talked a lot about following your passions. And I think really having an idea and direction of who you are and showing your values through the kinds of activities you choose to pursue really demonstrates well in an application and then helps to really further direct from those experiences what you're going to do with your career.
Absolutely. Andrew, anything else to add here?
I think we talked about a lot of this, and they did a great job. I think there's no real answers to any of these questions. It's exactly what you need to just reflect on through this. You know, if you were to ask me what I would try to work on more and or how many hours I need, I couldn't give you a real answer in terms of skills. I think really the communication skill, I know I've hit that probably like half a dozen times already, but communication is key. Uh, Learning how to do, if you have the opportunity to do research, learning how to do really effective research is always great. And I know that's a whole nother webinar and everything, but you can always sort of cross-contaminate your skills there. And then always learning how to be a good leader, right? There's always ways that you can learn to um, become a more effective leader of both people, of patients, and learning how to talk to, as Nate said, there is a hierarchy, but you need to learn how to talk to a hierarchy, make your voice heard. You do have a voice, everyone has a voice. And so make sure you're heard, and you can make a really big difference. I had friends in undergrad who, started with an idea to raise money for cancer and color runs. And they kind of just like, they said it, they got a lot of momentum, a lot of support, and every year, I think they raised almost $300,000 over in Pittsburgh during their color run. So it came from this sort of idea or spark, and they can make this into a really tangible thing that, you know, is their passion now. And every year they run it, and it's truly it's a lot of fun. So don't lose sight of that in terms of what you want to do. And as Nate said, they can see through if you did something just to check a box because it seems like a good idea. Right. And I don't think any of us here at Inspira would ever tell you just like do something to get it done in terms of your med school application.
All right, so we just have a couple minutes left. So we're just gonna go through these last tips and tricks before we close things off for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I can take half and take the other half, Andrew, but I will
sure.
say quality over quantity. And this links to your passions. Do things that you're passionate about. For quality purposes, like figure out like what you are giving and what you are getting out of the experience. You don't have to have done absolutely every type of clinical experience or every type of volunteer experience, but showing that you committed to an organization and you made a meaningful impact in the organization is really important. And I think longitudinal opportunities, like if you were around somewhere for a period of time and made a difference over 3 years, becomes more important than having 5 different little spurts of bursts of an activity. Set clear goals about what you want to do to what you want to get out of the experience. What skills do you want to work on? What clinical knowledge do you want to work on? Again, we talked about prioritizing your passions. And I already touched on longitudinal experiences with the quality over quantity.
Sure. To keep this going, like prioritize your passions, as I said, and then go in with a drive to learn, grow. This comes from your passions, right? Don't go in there and learn how to force yourself to learn something you really, really don't want to do, right? You don't have to, learn a whole new language just because we said like, oh, you should be a translator. Like that's not reasonable. Just to do, go in there, be passionate. If you love playing music, there are so many great opportunities for you to bring music into healthcare. And that's a very underutilized aspect of healthcare. Create your own opportunities. This is what we've been hitting on: leadership, 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 right? This goes into leadership and volunteering, leadership and all these areas, because there's no score. You don't have a GPA for leadership. You don't have a leadership, right? Like 3-digit score for that. So these are ways that you can talk about to build those experiences, to get those topics for essays and interview conversation pieces. Speak with your advisors to maximize your network. This is really good because you'd be surprised how much pull some people have in the admissions office that you would never guess, right? They'd be like, oh, like you're working with this, you're a scribe for a surgeon who was in the same class or did residency with the dean of a medical school, right? And his word can mean way more than any MCAT score, any GPA, or any whatever else is on someone else's application, just because they know him and they trust his judgment. Right? And that maybe that's not necessarily fair, but be polite, be professional, maximize learning how to talk to these people, how to interact with these people, keep them all, don't burn any bridges. Like, this is not the time. And then of course, when you have such a great network, you're a leader, this goes all into a written letter of recommendation where, unfortunately, a lot of the times letters of rec, people usually say, hey, what do you want me to write in your letter of recommendation? Right. And you need to tell them, you need to prompt them what you've done. And it's not because they don't know, but because they want to have you focus them in what they're writing. Right. Or what you want to come across to a medical school committee. So if you've been saying like, hey, like, you could say that I started it out as, coffee delivery boy, but I ended up being the leader of, and I brought in music into medicine. That's an amazing narrative that they can summarize in one paragraph and show how you went from, giving coffee to one patient to playing the guitar in front of a group of 30 patients every single day. That's growth, and that's experience, and that's showing leadership and creating your own opportunities, and write about that later. So there's a lot of different ways you can sell it. And I think that hopefully people got something out of this. Really, really enjoy talking about it. So
Yeah. Thank you both for being here and sharing your knowledge with us. It was great to have you. I think we're over time, so we're going to wrap things up, but you can watch this webinar and all of our other webinars on our website or on our YouTube channel. Nate and Andrew, thank you both so much for being here. And for those of you who have joined us, feel free to go on our website, schedule a consultation with our team. It's free. We can talk about your profile and figure out how we can help better your application to med school and help you find success there. And I hope everyone has a really great afternoon and Super Bowl weekends.
Thank you, Hallie, for organizing and for hosting us.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
thanks so much. Bye-bye.